Diggs is a commander, 10 million guaranteed, confirmed by Jordan Schultz and Ian Rapoport, 12 million ceiling per 7 News out of Ashburn. The weapon Jaden Daniels was missing just landed, but in a minute I'm telling you who loses their spot because of it. Darren Payne is heading into a contract year with 0 extension talks, and that gamble from Peters could blow up in his face. An injury in Ashburn just kicked off a war for the center job. Raise hail. Okay, let's take this slow because there is a lot of new information and I want you to get all of it, not just the headline. Jordan Schultz confirmed with multiple sources that the Commanders are signing Diggs, describing him directly as a DMV native coming off the 7th 1,000-yard receiving season of his career, expected to play a prominent role this season for Jaden Daniels. Ian Rapoport minutes later added the detail we were all waiting on, 1-year contract worth more than $10 million with Diggs arriving after a full offseason at complete health, ready in his words to hit the ground running as a key weapon for Daniels in his 3rd year in the league. And 7 News, with Scott Abraham confirming out of Ashburn, put the exact number on the table, a 1-year deal that can reach up to $12 million with incentives. That gap between the base number and the incentive-laden ceiling tells me something important about how this deal is structured, and I will explain that in a second. First, the context for why this player was still available this deep into August, because some folks still do not understand the real layers of this story. Diggs signed a 3-year, $63.5 million contract with New England back in March of last year and ended up leading every Patriots pass catcher with 104 targets, 85 catches, and 1,013 yards, plus 4 touchdowns in a season that carried them all the way to Super Bowl LX. Those are not washed up numbers. Those are true WR1 numbers. But on March 12th of this year, New England released him, clearing $16.8 million in cap space, after what several outlets described as a scandal-filled year, a direct reference to the legal process Diggs went through. And I want to be direct here, because on this channel we do not hide anything. Diggs was charged with felony strangulation, a serious charge, along with a lesser assault charge. In May, a jury found him not guilty on those charges, and in June, the NFL formally closed its own investigation with no additional discipline. That process is legally resolved, and with that chapter closed, the market finally felt comfortable moving, and Washington is the one who moved first. Now, let's talk about what this player actually brings on the field, because the contract is one thing, but the talent is a completely different conversation. Bradley Locker of Pro Football Focus had already named the Commanders the ideal landing spot for Diggs on his ranking of the league's top 10 remaining free agents, and the numbers he cited are serious. Diggs finished 10th among qualifying receivers in PFF receiving grade at 82.6, and also 10th in yards per route run at 2.08, dropping just 2.9% of his targets. At 32 years old, playing for his 4th team in 4 years, Diggs has posted a receiving grade of at least 77.6 in every single season of his career. That, fam, is real consistency, not a player coasting on old reputation, and this arrives exactly where this roster needed it most. Christopher Knox of Bleacher Report had flagged Washington's lack of receivers as the team's biggest weakness heading into the season, pointing out that McLaurin was limited to 10 games last year by a lingering quad injury and that no other receiver even reached 750 yards. That is the exact problem this signing solves. Terry McLaurin is still the heart of this position, the unquestioned WR1, but now he has a partner next to him who can pull coverage away when McLaurin is bracketed and who can produce on his own when McLaurin is on the sideline nursing a bump. That is the difference between an offense with 1 weapon and an offense with 2. Now, my personal opinion, no filter. I have been on Peters since July for taking this long to close this deal, and I still think waiting until August was an unnecessary risk considering Kansas City was literally sitting there waiting for Xavier Worthy to get hurt to make their move. But credit where it is due. When he finally pulled the trigger, he did it at the right speed and without giving away more than he needed to. A 1-year deal with a $12 million ceiling does not touch the future cap in any meaningful way. If Diggs performs at the level he performed in New England, Washington has the option to extend him next year from a position of strength. If he does not, they walk away with 0 heavy financial commitment. That is exactly the kind of calculated risk Peters should have been taking from the start, and I am glad to see that in the end, he took it the right way. But here is the uncomfortable question almost nobody is asking yet, and to me, it is the most important one of all. who loses their spot on the roster because of this signing. Because receiver room space is not infinite, Antonio Williams, the third-round rookie, probably still keeps his roster spot because this team needs young development long-term, but his reps in the starting package are dropping immediately. Treylon Burks, who arrived trying to rebuild his career after those failed first-round expectations in Tennessee, is now literally fighting for his roster spot because a 53-man roster has no room for 5 receivers if one of them is Diggs playing a prominent role. Luke McCaffrey and Jalen Lane probably survive because of their special teams value and their motion package usage, but the fight for the last spots at that position just got a whole lot harder overnight. I could not agree more. If you were a fringe receiver on this roster yesterday morning, your path to Washington for week 1 just got a lot narrower today, and there is a tactical question still sitting unanswered, and it is going to determine whether this signing turns into real production or into an underused player. James Dudko of Heavy had argued before this got confirmed that David Blau's scheme, with its emphasis on plays with Jaden Daniels under center, motion, and play action, might not exactly need the precise route running profile Diggs represents. I could be wrong, but I do not think that is a real problem. Diggs is not a one-trick receiver. He can line up outside, he can work the slot, he can run intermediate depth routes that punish zone coverage, and that versatility is exactly what an offensive coordinator wants once he already has a fixed WR1 like McLaurin. The real question is not whether he fits the scheme. The real question is how many weeks of chemistry building and rep after rep with Jaden Daniels he is going to need before that connection reaches WR1 starter level, because he is walking straight into training camp with 0 off-season time together. That learning curve, even if it is short, is the only thing keeping my expectations a little tempered for September. My prediction, with a date attached so you can hold me to it. I think Diggs opens the regular season as the second receiver in snaps behind McLaurin, but does not lead the team in yards until after week 4, once the chemistry with Daniels is fully settled in. And by the end of the season, if he stays healthy, I think he finishes with no less than 700 yards, and somewhere between 5 and 7 touchdowns, numbers that would have been unthinkable for this roster spot just 2 weeks ago. This signing, bro, is without a doubt the single biggest move Adam Peters has made this entire training camp, period. Okay, switching topics, but staying on the same idea of front office decisions that personally give me some doubts. Let's talk about Darren Payne, because here we have a situation that, being honest, I think Adam Peters is handling with a calm that borders on dangerous, especially compared to the fast and correct call he just made with Diggs. Quick context for anyone not following the contract side closely. Payne signed a 4-year, $90 million extension back in 2023 after a season with 11.5 sacks that was, without question, the best of his career. That contract expires at the end of this season. In 2026, Payne is set to carry a cap hit of almost $28 million. And if Washington decides to cut him after the season, they could save around $16.8 million in cap space. Those numbers matter because they explain exactly why Peters is taking the stance he is taking, and that stance, stated by the GM himself back in June, was clear. They are not exploring an extension right now. The quote that circulated was something along the lines of not thinking they're going to explore that at this time, referring to sitting down with Payne before the season ends. Washington wants to see what Payne does first at 29 years old in the final year of his deal, playing inside Daronte Jones's aggressive scheme. I get the logic from a cold cap management standpoint, but here is my problem with this strategy, and I am saying this with total honesty. Payne's own history in contract years is exactly why this bet is risky. Look at the numbers. The last time Payne played a contract year, back in 2022, he exploded for those 11.5 sacks, 36 tackles for loss, and 2 Pro Bowl selections. That hunger year, that need to lock up the next contract, brought out the best in him. If that repeats itself in 2026, playing in a new scheme specifically designed to move him around the defensive line and create matchup advantages, Washington is going to find itself in exactly the same crossroads as 3 years ago, but with fewer options. Because by then, according to Bleacher Report reporting that circulated this week, several edge rushers on this roster are also set to hit free agency next spring. That means Peters will not just have to negotiate with Payne from a position of less leverage, he will also have to compete for available money against his own players at other positions. Gary Davenport of Bleacher Report put it bluntly, and I agree completely with his read. He identified the decision on Payne's next contract as the single most important decision facing the Commanders before the season kicks off. And he added something that sums up the risk perfectly, the idea that this weight could come back to haunt Washington if PAYNE repeats the pattern of blowing up in a contract year. I could not agree more. Now, to be fair to Peters' position, we have to acknowledge the full context. Washington already parted ways with Jonathan Allen this offseason, after a trade request did not pan out the way the player wanted, and Allen ended up playing in Minnesota last year before signing with Cincinnati for 2026. Montez Sweat had already been traded to Chicago before that. Chase Young was dealt to San Francisco. Of that historic defensive line core, Washington built draft after draft in the late 2010s, taking a first-rounder 4 straight years. PAYNE is literally the last one left. That gives him enormous symbolic weight inside the locker room, and it explains why sources inside the organization, both public and private, have praised his offseason, describing him as more relaxed and more open than in previous years. And that maturity matters, because PAYNE himself, in recent comments, showed he fully understands his situation without creating any kind of drama. He said, and I thought this was a classy statement considering the uncertainty around his future, that it is a blessing to be in one place this long in this league, because few players get that, and that he just wants to be there to help the team get where they want to go. There is no holdout signal, no public resentment. Just a professional doing his job while the front office decides his future without any rush. But, and here I come back to my central point, Peters' patience has a ceiling. If PAYNE dominates under Jones's scheme, if he gets back anywhere close to those 2022 numbers, Washington is going to have to choose between paying a third big contract to a 30-year-old defensive tackle, something that historically ends badly for most teams in this league, or letting go of the last symbol of that golden era defensive line, right when he is helping them win the most. There is no easy answer here, and honestly, I could be wrong about which decision is the right one, but what I can tell you is that watching Peters shut down extension rumors back in June, and then watching beat reporters like Gary Davenport flag this as the most important situation on the roster before September, leaves me with an uneasy feeling that this is going to give us headaches in the second half of the season. And I want to be clear about where I stand on this, because I have been saying the same thing about Jonathan Allen, about Sweat, about Young. This front office has a pattern of letting the contractual clock run right down to the wire before making a move, and that pattern paid off a couple times when they got draft picks back in return. But with PAYNE, the math is different, because there is no draft compensation waiting on the other side if he simply walks in March. Here's my personal bet, with a date attached so you can hold me to it. If PAYNE reaches week 10 of the regular season with more than 6 sacks, Peters is going to have no choice but to sit down and negotiate before the end of November, because by then he will not be able to pretend this resolves itself. And if that does not happen and they let him walk in March free agency without even trying, to me that is going to be a front office mistake just as big as anything the previous regime pulled with this team, the one it took us so long to leave behind. And to close things out, let's talk about what is happening on the offensive line, because between early injuries and real position competition, there is a story here that deserves more attention than most national coverage is giving it. Training camp opened with pads on from day one, and day one already gave us a significant absence. Nick Allegretti, the projected starting center for this season, strained his calf in Wednesday's first practice, and, according to Dan Quinn, is expected to miss about a week, maybe a bit more. And look, this is not a small detail. Allegretti came to Washington after winning 3 Super Bowls with Kansas City, and even though in his career he has only started 4 games at center, compared to 35 at guard, he himself has said center is the position that feels most natural to him. He was, up until this moment, the clear favorite to win the starting job. But here's what makes this interesting, and why this story deserves its own segment instead of getting buried as a simple injury note. Allegretti's absence is giving real reps to players we needed to see under pressure. Julian Good-Jones, who in his entire NFL career had barely played 2 snaps before this season, stepped into his spot in full-team drills. And even more interesting, Brandon Coleman, who had been mentioned as a competitor for the left guard job, started taking center reps after practice, according to ESPN's John Keem. That to me is a clear sign the coaching staff is not leaving anything to chance. If Allegretti's injury drags on longer than expected, Coleman could emerge as a real option at center, which would open up yet another question about who ends up winning the left guard spot among whoever is left competing there. And let's not forget 6th round rookie Matt Gulbin, who is also in the mix as a third emergency option at that spot. This kind of internal competition, even if it is born out of an injury, is exactly the kind of roster Darwinism I like to see in a well-run training camp. Dan Quinn and his staff are using every single practice to generate real information about depth, and at a position as critical to protecting Jaden Daniels as center, any extra data on who can hold up under pressure is worth its weight in gold, and the offensive line was not the only area that took a hit this week. The day after Allegretti's injury, tight end John Bates strained his hamstring in Thursday's practice, and Quinn confirmed he will be out a couple of weeks. This one worries me a bit more because Bates is, without exaggeration, one of the best blocking tight ends in the entire league, a piece Washington signed to a 3-year, $21 million deal specifically for that role, and with the expectation that Blau's offense will use more 2 tight end formations this year, missing camp reps right when he needed to learn a brand new scheme from scratch really stings. The silver lining, if we are looking for one, is that this opens the door for Ben Sinnott, the former second rounder out of Kansas State who has not broken out yet in his career, but has the physical talent to do it, plus Chiga Okonkwo, the free agency addition who can actually catch the football, and Colson Yankoff, who has already earned praise in camp with a spectacular red zone catch. Look, I am not going to pretend these injuries are good news. They are not. But I am also not going to fall into the offseason panic some outlets are selling. Washington has real depth at both spots, and what we are seeing in Ashburn this week is literally the entire point of training camp. Finding out who steps up when Plan A is not available. And here's my personal bet, even though it is still August and this could flip 100 times before week 1, I think Brandon Coleman ends up winning the starting center job, not Allegretti. I say this with all the humility in the world because I could be completely wrong and Allegretti could come back from the injury and take his spot right back without any issue. But something tells me, watching how Quinn is spreading out those extra reps after every practice, that the coaching staff is already seeing something in Coleman that has not gone public yet. If that happens, the entire conversation about this offensive line changes because then the real fight for left guard opens up between Chris Paul and whoever is left available at that spot. Hold on to this prediction until the 53-man roster is set, because if I am wrong, I will own it right here on the channel. And that is everything I have for today. And look, I had to rewrite half of this script in real time because the news we had been waiting for months finally happened. Stefon Diggs is a commander. The WR1 next to McLaurin this roster has needed since March. PAYNE is playing for his contractual future under a brand new scheme, while Peters bets, again, on patience. And the offensive line keeps reinventing itself practice by practice because of a couple of injuries that hopefully end up revealing real depth instead of real problems. This franchise has spent too many years promising and falling short, but this roster, with Jaden Daniels healthy, with Diggs lined up next to McLaurin, and this kind of genuine internal competition up front feels truly different. It feels like a team finally building the right way, even if the front office makes calls on PAYNE that personally leave me with more than one doubt. Raise hail, always. If this video gave you something, hit the like button, subscribe, and tell me down in the comments, no filter. What are you expecting from Diggs in his first game in this jersey? I want to read every single answer. See you in the next one.